actually became more religious, and I'm very religious at this point right now.
Yes.
No.
Yeah. Go to church.
No.
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 Yeah, kind of. I don't really consider myself.
Hi, welcome to Passion Matters. Young people's connection to religion has always been somewhat fluid, at least from my perspective. But the culmination of a 10-year study of youth and religion tracked over 3,000 young people from the year 2002, when they were between the ages of 13 and 17, into their young adulthood. And some of the results may surprise you. Joining me today for Passion Matters are the two authors of a new book on that study, and it's the fourth and final book based on their research. And the book is called Back Pocket God, Religion and Spirituality in the Lives of Emerging Adults. Melinda Lundquist Denton is an associate professor of sociology at the University of Texas at San Antonio. And Richard Florey is the Senior Director of Research and Evaluation at the Center for Religion and Civic Culture at the University of Southern California. Professors Denton and Florey, welcome to Passion Matters.
Thank you.
Professor Denton, the biggest winner, if you will, of the study seems to be the growth of the non-religious. So when you began with these young people, according to what you've written, only 11% of them identified as non-religious. But when you finish with them 10 years later, 35% identify that way. And also almost half of those studied never show up at religious services at all. So what kind of happened in those 10 years? Why do you think they left?
On the attendance side, really what we argue is that what we're not seeing is animosity toward religion or a intentional turning away from religion so much as that religion just has gradually taken a back seat in their lives. It's not as compelling for them when their lives are full of friends and family and work and school obligations, and religion has sort of just continued to drift down the list of priorities for these young people. The other piece of it that we need to keep in mind is that our study started when they were 13 to 17 years old. So they were still adolescents in their parents' home. And one of the arguments we make early in the study is that adolescents are beginning to develop autonomy, and that autonomy extends to their religious lives. And so over the course of these 10 years, they've developed into their own identities, their own families, et cetera. And so religion is one of the things they have to decide whether they're going to keep that from their upbringing or sort of make their own way. And so that's some of what we see reflected here as well.
So Professor Florey, is the flight of young people though from religion really that surprising? I mean, haven't young people always kind of done their own thing for a while and then come back to religion later when they get married and have kids? I mean, how is this trend really any different?
Well, that's the story, and that's what a lot of people expect to happen, and it has happened in the past. But we think there's something different going on now. Yes, young people do have sometimes, tenuous relationships with all institutions, not just religious institutions. But as we see in this project, that they've gradually moved away. Religion, the way they talk about religion is that it's much less a part of their lives, much less a primary part of their lives, and so. Then when we get to the part about marriage and children, what we really find is if they marry early, which the more religious they are, the more likely they are to remarry and have children early, the more likely they'll stay in. And so the other people are already on their way out, and they've set up their lives outside of church or synagogue or whatever, and there's less option for them to move back in because that social capital they might otherwise have in those institutions is likely gone.
Mm. Professor Denton, then there's a growth also in this indeterminate category, which kind of you guys say are those who don't label themselves as anything. I suppose they're like the nuns, N-O-N-E-S that we call them today. So are they leaving religion and finding spirituality elsewhere or searching for it elsewhere, or are they just giving up on the whole ball of wax?
Yeah, when we started the study back in 2001, that was one of the main questions we were looking for, is how much is this alternative spirituality replacing institutionalized religion? We really didn't find that to be a predominant theme in our research across the 10 years, that those leaving religion weren't necessarily seeking it out elsewhere. There's some spirituality, some eclectic combining of different things, but that's a very small percentage of the youth. Most of them are simply drifting away. And the indeterminates are those, that's a category where they still identify as religious, but they don't have a specific label. So that would be people who say, well, I'm just a Christian, and they don't necessarily identify as Catholic or Protestant or, Baptist or Methodist. They're just, it's a generic Christian or generic religious label. So yeah, I don't think it represents some alternate spirituality as much as a gradual drifting away from whatever label they had previously used.
Professor Flory, the smaller group who are very committed to their faith and are actually becoming more so, you say in the study, and marriage and kids, as we mentioned, seem to help. Some are also leaving evangelical Protestantism to join more mainline churches. So what is that about?
Well, there's part of that is that they are looking for something else than the kind of more rigid evangelical fundamentalist kind of world they grew up in. But in reality, that's a pretty small group. I believe the number is about 5% that's moved from evangelical to more mainline denominations. And our question actually is that a way station ultimately on their way out? It's not clear at this point.
Professor Denton, we're all in lockdown now with COVID-19, and we've been hearing a lot about people celebrating religious services online with Zoom, et cetera. And it strikes me that this might be more popular with young people. So what do you think about the practice of faith now with young people in the midst of COVID-19?
Yeah, we've actually talked some about this, and I do think that the sort of push of religious groups onto technology might be a draw for some young people. It certainly will make it more accessible in some ways, but it doesn't necessarily reflect increased commitment to the institution. And being able to attend a service online actually makes it easier to hop from one service to the next to sort of pick and choose the pieces you like. What we will have yet to see is how this affects long-term commitment to those institutions. And so the technology piece might be a draw for young people. The flip side of it is that they're watching closely to see how religious groups react and handle this pandemic, how much it becomes politicized, how much it becomes something that draws people together. So, but I don't think that church is the first place that these young people will think about in terms of a refuge or in terms of some place to go to help handle these problems or the stress of COVID-19. They're much more likely to rely on family and friends for that. So the long-term impact will be interesting, but it's, even if we see a short-term bump, the trick will be whether they can establish these long-term commitments.
Hmm. Professor Flory, you say that young people don't like the mix of politics and religion. It's funny though, but I would have kind of thought the opposite, since it seems like social action and so many religious issues are also political ones, that young people would be attracted to the coming together of those two areas, but not so, huh?
Politics and politicians are not held in high regard. On average, they think that they are just, looking for a way to get ahead themselves. And, we have a lot of examples of that in public life. Religion is primarily a personal and private affair for these young people. They don't want any religious authority tell them what they can and can't do. And I think they return the favor. It's like, again, it's sort of back to the title of the book. We will use you, or we will participate with you to the extent they do, to the extent it helps us in some fashion or another individually. But other than that, we don't want it. So they think that religious groups can do good in the world. They just aren't really that interested in that combination or in hanging out with the religious world.
Mm. Professor Denton, you say that young people aren't so much opposed to religion as uninterested.
Right.
So I'm wondering, is that their fault or is it our fault? I mean, are we as religious institutions not adapting enough to meet the needs of young people? Is that what they feel?
That's a really great question. I think certainly there's some sense that institutions maybe are less relevant for their age group, have been less sensitive to their needs, etc. I think the other piece of it is there's less of a felt need. And like I said, life is changing so quickly, and they're have so much on their plates. This period of time historically of the transition to adulthood is marked by a lot of economic uncertainty and educational uncertainty and high student loan debt and all these other things that pile on their plate. And they are not clear that religion is really relevant, that religion has anything to say about those issues. And I think the issues that when they look at religious institutions, and this sort of ties back to the question about politics, the politics they do see those religious institutions getting involved in are not the things that they care the most about.
Hmm. Professor Flory, the title of your book, Back Pocket God, suggests that for young people, God is almost like an app, like on their phones, or readily accessible when they need it, easily put away. So it sounds very individualistic to me and not based on a communitarian notion at all. But if people, young people, and we see this with the environment right now, are indeed interested in social justice and social action, how do these two things jibe then?
Well, there's some interesting questions on our survey that ask these young people, are you, and I don't have the exact wording at my fingertips here, but basically it asks them, are you concerned about and homeless, the elderly, the poor, things like that? And on the concern level, they're well above 50% of emerging adults say, yes, I'm very concerned about that. And then there's a couple other questions that ask them, have you donated money to any causes like that? And another question about, have you volunteered your time? Those numbers drop significantly from the concern. So the concern is high, but the participation is low. So when we talk about young people, there's a lot of myths, I think, out there about young people. And I think what happens is that people look at the group that is active and extrapolate that to the whole young people. And this is a problem, frankly. I have journalist friends, and they say journalists only need 3 sources, and then you have a trend. And so they find 3 young people. This is partly facetious, but you find 3 young people that exhibit this thing you're writing about, and suddenly you have, oh, look at all these young people that are doing all this stuff. And so this is not to say that young people aren't concerned, but it's like what we try to do in this book across the board is to say, yes, these things are going on, but these are the major trends, and these are the sort of other kind of counter trends that are going against us. In my view, the sort of social justice angle would be a counter trend to the hyper individualization that we're seeing throughout society, but certainly among young people.
So I'd like to end on something that's a little bit out of your field as sociologists, but I'd like your opinion on it if you'd be willing to give it. I'd like both of you to answer this. If you were to give advice to religious institutions right now who are interested in reaching out to young people or holding on to young people or making them vibrant and relevant in their communities, what advice would you give religious institutions right now to make that kind of appeal?
Who's going first? No, I'm kidding. I'll go first. So I have a few thoughts about that, and a lot of this is really based on some successful groups that we've been studying in our center throughout LA and beyond, and that is that you could consider them a vibrant congregation internally and externally. And I think what they do is they embed themselves in community. So it's not in the actual community. It's not like a kind of mythical community of people that are wherever, but they're in a physical place. They commit to that physical place. People in the community know they're there. One pastor I interviewed recently he told me that this is a great line. This needs to be a T-shirt. He says to us, yeah, the people in the neighborhood call us the church that gives a shit. And I said, that's a great T-shirt. He says, yeah, but we can't do it. But I think that's the nub of it for me is they need to demonstrate to young people that they give a shit about them. And that's listening to them, caring about them, providing community for them, providing opportunities to do these things that they may want to do but don't know how to go out and do it. It's like serving other people.
Great. And Professor Denton?
Yeah, I would just follow on that to say, I think what one of the keys Richard points out is that it's the listening to them, but also meeting them where they are and recognizing. I think the days of a large church building, putting on nice programs and hoping people show up are probably not going to work as well for this group. I think they're not really working well for the population as a whole, but I think the idea of going into their lives and figuring out what they need and where they can be of service to them. Young people are looking for community. They want community. I just don't know that the church really crosses their mind as the first place to look for that. And so the church is going to need to come to them and establish that community.
Well, Professors Denton and Flory, thank you so much for joining me on Passion Matters. It's been great to have you. And thanks all of you as well. We'll see you next time.